Citizenship on the Go. Lesson 3. American History, 1800 through the Civil War. Part 1. Slavery and the Industrial Revolution. This lesson is about American history from the start of the 19th century through the Civil War. It explains some of the causes and results of that terrible war between the states. The 1800s were a time of great growth and turmoil in the United States. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution brought major advances in the kinds of technology available to people living in the US, transforming the economy and changing social norms throughout the nation. As this was happening, the United States began expanding on the map. As the US government pushed the nation's borders farther and farther west, the American armed forces came into conflict with the militaries of other nations, and the United States fought its first official international wars. Many territories and states were added to the US during the 1800s, and the country's population grew by leaps and bounds. Throughout all of these developments, disagreements among Americans over the issue of slavery grew more and more pronounced. The problem of slavery divided popular and political opinion in the United States to the point that the country finally entered a civil war. Throughout the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s, Europeans had come to America in search of freedom and economic opportunity. At the same time, however, tens of thousands of people from Africa were brought here and forced to work without pay or rights of any kind. These people were called slaves, and the business of kidnapping and selling people into forced labor was known as the slave trade. By the end of the colonial period, over 300,000 Africans had been brought to America as slaves. Most of their children and grandchildren were forced to work as slaves too. Many worked on plantations or farms. This painting depicts enslaved people working on George Washington's farm in Virginia. In Washington's day, there were around 700,000 people working as slaves in southern states like Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. During the same period, in northern states like Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey, there were around 40,000 enslaved people. During the colonial period, the number of enslaved people in southern regions of North America was larger than in northern regions because the two areas of the continent had very different economies. This remained true after the American colonies won their independence from the British in the 1700s, and the difference only grew during the 1800s. In the 19th century, states in northern areas of the USA had economies that relied mostly on factories and on small family farms, while states in southern areas of the USA had economies built around huge plantations, where crops that do well in warm weather climates were raised to be sold off to other parts of the US and to countries around the world. Tobacco was a successful moneymaker for many white people who came to America seeking economic opportunity. This crop, used to make cigars, cigarettes, and other addictive products, was grown on plantations throughout North America and the Caribbean from the time of the earliest European colonists. Most of the people who worked on tobacco plantations in the Caribbean and in the American South in the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s were enslaved Africans, or the children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren of enslaved Africans. Cotton was another major cash crop grown in southern U.S. states in the 1800s. Both tobacco and cotton required a lot of labor to grow and harvest. As with tobacco plantation workers, most people working on cotton plantations in the southern United States before the Civil War were enslaved Africans or their descendants. During the colonial period, cotton was very expensive because the plant was difficult to process. Before cotton could be made into cloth, many seeds needed to be removed from the fibers by hand. The process was so slow that one person could clean only about a pound of cotton a day. Soon, however, that situation would change. Civics test question. The colonists came to America for many reasons. Name one. The colonists came to America for many reasons. Name one. Economic opportunity. Before the United States gained its independence, many Europeans moved to America in the hopes of getting better jobs and making more money than they were able to back in Europe. European colonists chose to move to America because they wanted freedom. Some colonists were looking for political liberty. Some were looking for religious freedom and were trying to escape persecution. For many, economic opportunity was a strong motivation. Civics test question. What group of people was taken and sold as slaves? What group of people was taken and sold as slaves? Africans. Africans, or people from Africa, were taken to America and sold as slaves. Most people from Africa who came to live in the 13 original colonies were not there by choice. They had been taken from their homelands to be sold into slavery in America. Civics test question. There were 13 original states. Name 5. There were 13 original states. Name 5. Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, North Carolina, and South Carolina. 5 of the 13 original states were Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, North Carolina, and South Carolina. During the 1600s, 1700s, and early 1800s, people from Africa were forced into slave labor in all 13 British colonies that became the 13 original states of the United States: Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, North Carolina, South Carolina, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and Georgia. In the 1700s and 1800s, there was an industrial revolution in Europe and North America. A revolution is an enormous change to the way a system works, and the Industrial Revolution brought major developments in industry or business. New kinds of machines and techniques were created in the 18th and 19th centuries for farming, manufacturing, transportation, and more, radically transforming American commercial and social systems. New technologies introduced to the world during the Industrial Revolution altered the daily lives of North American people of every race, gender, and economic class. During the Industrial Revolution, assembly line manufacturing became the primary way clothing, household tools, weapons, vehicles, and many everyday items were produced in the United States. Instead of objects being made by hand from start to finish by a single craftsperson who knew how to complete every step of the process, many things were now made by machine, with rows of workers in factories each assigned the completion of just one simple task before a component would be handed off to another person for the next step to be completed. This work was often monotonous and boring, but it could be very dangerous too, as there were not many laws yet in the United States requiring employers to safeguard their workers from hazardous conditions. Untrained people, including small children, were often told to handle powerful machines and perilous substances without any protective gear. In northern states, such as Connecticut, factories with assembly lines became big business in the 1800s. While most people who worked in such factories were not slaves, manufacturers in the North relied heavily on supplies of materials, like cotton, collected and processed by enslaved people in the South. One large manufacturer in the North was the Colt Armory, based in Connecticut's capital city, Hartford. The Colt Armory produced new kinds of guns that were sold throughout the United States in the 1800s. These weapons were used extensively in the Mexican-American War as the USA pushed its borders westward. Revolvers manufactured by Colt were also used by Americans from both the North and the South during the Civil War, contributing to the huge death toll on both sides of that conflict. In the years leading up to the Civil War, Southern plantations and Northern factories were able to reach more customers in farther away places than ever before because of the development of new means of transportation. During the Industrial Revolution, steamships, railway engines, and other vehicles that could move things around with unprecedented speed shipped people and products throughout the expanding United States. Along with other machines invented during this period, motorized transports like steamships contributed to the geographic and economic growth of the United States in the 1800s. Civics test question. Name one example of an American innovation. Name one example of an American innovation. Assembly line. One American innovation that had a huge impact on the economy and on Americans' everyday lives in the 1800s was the assembly line. Assembly line manufacturing would later be used to mass produce many other groundbreaking innovations, such as the automobile, taking Industrial Revolution developments in transportation to the next level by introducing cars and other vehicles powered by internal combustion engines to the use of both private businesses and the general public. Assembly line manufacturing and other innovations of the Industrial Revolution also paved the way for the introduction of complex technologies and constructions, such as the light bulb, skyscrapers, the airplane, and the integrated circuit. Eventually, advances in science and engineering would even make possible space-age achievements, like landing on the moon. One Industrial Revolution invention that had a particularly notable impact on American society was the cotton gin. The cotton gin was created by Eli Whitney, an inventor from Massachusetts who moved to Connecticut as a young man. Whitney was interested in making agriculture less labor-intensive. After seeing how difficult and time-consuming it was for people to pick the seeds out of cotton by hand, he created a machine for quickly straining out seeds that took very little effort to run. The United States has what is called a capitalist economy. In an economic system based on capitalism, most businesses are not run by the government. Instead, most businesses are owned and run by private individuals, as are most of the workspaces, machines, tools, and other materials used to make a profit. The USA's economic system is also known as a free market economy. In countries that have a free market economy, individuals who own land, money, or other resources decide how they want to invest these things without the government setting many rules on investment. If one business idea doesn't seem to be working out, investors can try something different. In America's capitalist, or free market economy, Eli Whitney's cotton gin had a huge impact on what wealthy landowners in the South decided to do with the resources they had. It influenced business owners in the South to make very different decisions from business owners in the North, increasing economic differences between the two regions of the United States. In the late 1700s, slavery was starting to slowly grow less common in the South because big plantations weren't making enough of a profit to convince landowners that it was worth it to keep so many people working as slaves in the fields. Whitney's cotton gin changed that, however. Instead of cleaning just 1 pound of cotton a day, using Whitney's new machine, a single person could process about 50 pounds daily. Whitney believed that by cutting down the amount of work needed to process cotton, his machine would make slavery less popular in the United States. Eventually, he thought, using the gin to replace human labor would help end slavery all through the South. However, the opposite happened. With Whitney's gin, growing cotton became more profitable. Cotton plantations in the South grew much bigger, and some plantations that had been growing other crops switched to cotton. Businesses throughout the United States began using more cotton than ever before in goods that called for yarn or thread, and cotton was sold by the ton to cloth-making facilities in northern states like Connecticut. As cotton became the main product of the South, the demand for slave labor on cotton plantations went up. In 1790, there had been 700,000 slaves in the South. By the mid-1800s, there were at least 3.2 million. In the American South, almost 1 person in 3 was a slave at the time of the 1850 census. Congress banned the importation of slaves to the United States from other countries toward the start of the 1800s, but the number of enslaved people in the country continued to grow anyway, because by law, most children of people in slavery were also slaves from birth. With cotton bringing in major profits to landowners in the South, many families that ran plantation businesses became even more insistent than before on keeping slavery legal in their states. They also pushed for the creation of more laws to prevent people born into slavery from escaping to freedom elsewhere. While factories in the North relied heavily on slavery for the materials they used, they did not have many enslaved people working for them directly. Slavery was still permitted to some degree by most governments of the northern states, but it was more restricted than in the South. America's capitalist economic system had allowed for the development of two very different industrial systems in the North and the South. In the 1800s, most plantation owners felt slavery was necessary to the survival of their economy, but business owners in the North didn't feel as strongly that they needed slavery to make a profit. A divide in popular opinion over whether slavery should be legal in the United States grew among white middle and upper class Americans. Civics test question. What is the economic system of the United States? What is the economic system of the United States? Capitalism. The United States has a capitalist economy, or a free market economy. In the 1800s, the economic system of the United States was already capitalism, and most investors in the North chose to pursue kinds of businesses that were different from what most investors in the South pursued. The United States free market economy contributed to huge regional economic differences between the North and the South. Slavery had already been a topic of debate when the Constitution was being written in 1787. Some of the founding fathers of the United States believed that slavery was obviously evil and should be immediately abolished throughout the land. Governor Morris of Pennsylvania, for example, argued that the supreme law of the land should unambiguously forbid slavery for all time. When the issue arose at the Constitutional Convention of whether enslaved people should be included when taking state population counts, Morris argued that anyone who counted toward the state population was, by definition, a person.
Are slaves men?
He asked, rhetorically.
Then make them citizens and let them vote.
Other founding fathers, however, were pro-slavery. They refused to accept the new Constitution unless slavery remained legal in their home states. And still other delegates to the convention who did not favor slavery themselves cautioned that the citizens of many states would likely vote against ratifying the Constitution if rules prohibiting the slave trade were included. About half the delegates to the Constitutional Convention had people working as slaves in their personal households. James Madison, for instance, owned a tobacco plantation in his home state of Virginia. There were more than 100 enslaved people working on the Madison family property in 1787, when James Madison helped write the Constitution. Madison said he viewed the American slave trade as dishonorable and as an embarrassment to the United States, since keeping people as slaves contradicted the ideals of liberty and equality. Despite these statements, he never made any serious attempt to abolish slavery, and he never set free any of the enslaved people he had working for him personally. At the Constitutional Convention, Madison argued that enslaved people should be counted toward their state's population numbers when deciding how many representatives in Congress each state would have. Unlike Morris, however, Madison did not argue that including enslaved people in congressional counts meant that they should be freed or that they should be made citizens. The Founding Fathers who wrote the Constitution decided to include 3 out of every 5 enslaved people in state population counts. This decision, backed by Madison, gave states where slavery was widespread more representatives in the House of Representatives and more votes in the presidential electoral college than they would otherwise have had. Under this system, citizens of states with prevalent slavery had more of a say in Congress and in presidential elections than did citizens of states where slavery was restricted. As one of the writers of the Federalist Papers, which supported the passage of the U.S. Constitution, Madison also set out a public explanation of the population count plan. He thought Americans who wanted to keep slavery legal would be more likely to ratify the Constitution if they knew that the supreme law of the land would give states with slavery more of a voice in Congress and more power in the electoral college, while continuing to deny enslaved people themselves the vote. The Founding Fathers who signed the Constitution did not make slavery illegal throughout the nation in 1787. Instead, they left it up to state governments to decide for themselves if slavery would be allowed under their jurisdictions. To keep pro-slavery delegates from withdrawing their support, however, Madison, Washington, Franklin, and other writers of the Constitution also agreed on putting in a clause requiring Americans everywhere in the country to return people escaping from slavery to their enslavers. For example, if enslaved people from Georgia, where slavery was legal, ran away from the state and tried to hide in Vermont, where slavery was illegal, this clause of the Constitution required the people of Vermont to send the escapees across state borders back to their enslavers. This rule remained part of the supreme law of the land until slavery was abolished after the Civil War. Civics test question. What founding document was written in 1787? What founding document was written in 1787? The Constitution. The U.S. Constitution, the supreme law of the land in the United States, was written in 1787. Civics test question. Some states have more representatives than other states. Why? Some states have more representatives than other states. Why? Because they have more people. The Constitution, which forms the government, establishes the rule that some states have more House representatives than other states, based on the size of each state's population. The writers of the Constitution disagreed about whether to count only citizens or to count all people living in a state when determining representation in the House of Representatives based on population. Slavery was abolished after the Civil War, ending the debate on whether enslaved people should count toward the state's population when determining representation in the House. But even today, lawmakers continue to debate whether representation in the House should be based on the total population of a state or on account of its citizens only. Currently, citizens and non-citizens alike are counted when determining number of representatives. Some states have more representatives than other states because some states have more people. Civics test question. Why were the Federalist Papers important? Why were the Federalist Papers important? They supported passing the Constitution. Lawmakers and other government officials in the 13 original states held lots of different opinions on major issues, but Federalists like Madison, Hamilton, and Jay worked to gain their support for the Constitution despite these deep disagreements. The Federalist Papers supported passing the U.S. Constitution even though universal agreement had not been reached on many points by representatives of all 13 states. The Federalist Papers were also important because they helped people understand the U.S. Constitution. Civics test question. The Federalist Papers supported the passage of the U.S. Constitution. Name one of the writers. The Federalist Papers supported the passage of the U.S. Constitution. Name one of the writers. Madison. James Madison not only helped write the Constitution, but he was also one of the writers of the Federalist Papers, which argued for the ratification of the Constitution by Americans in the 13 original states. The other two writers of the Federalist Papers were Alexander Hamilton and John Jay. All three Federalist Papers writers used the pen name Publius. Madison, Hamilton, and Jay used the Federalist Papers to argue for the passage of the U.S. Constitution by the 13 original states, despite fierce clashes in opinion among the Founding Fathers over slavery and other issues. Arguments over what the supreme law of the land should say about slavery only grew more pronounced as time went on. The support of Federalists like Madison, Hamilton, and Jay, however, secured the passage of the Constitution long before Americans reached a consensus on whether slavery should be legal in the United States.